Benson Otieno. Yeah, he's an advocate, and he's somebody I've known for a few years now. Very passionate about uh, uh, justice, and has been in leadership right from his school days. Is very knowledgeable in terms of law. Is a law researcher or a legal researcher, and currently works with Triple OK law firm, one of the major law firms in the region, and he's been at the forefront in matters of these bills. The last year's finance bill, they took government to court, and last week, was it this week, they were declared that they won. They actually won in the High Court, and now they also won in the Court of Appeal. There was an appeal, and they've won. And he made presentations at both levels of the court, and he's been involved in different other legal tussles in this country. So he's somebody you want to listen to. He's very much passionate about this field. The financial, this legal, the law regulating finance is not an easy thing to crack, and many people do not understand it, even people in the legal field. So we are pleased to have him. Yes, Benson, you can get started and go ahead without wasting much time.
Thank you very much, Peter. I hope I can be heard. Please confirm.
Yes, you can be hard. Hard, eh?
Thank you.
Yes.
So, as
Yeah.
you said, my name is Benson Odiworo Otieno. People who know me very well call me Sagwom. Um, you've mentioned a very interesting word. People interpret it differently. The the word advocate. So, who is an advocate? My definition has always been that an advocate is any person who champions for a particular thing. So you can't be an advocate for anything. So it matters what you're advocating for. In our field of law, we have the two troublesome terminologies, a lawyer and an advocate, especially in the wake of uh, situations where we are now seeing some people masquerading as having the capacity to represent others in court. So some people usually say, "Oh, he's a lawyer. He's not an advocate." It's an interesting thing. Every person should be interested in knowing anytime they speak with or interact with a lawyer. So thank you for that. Today we want to talk about audits in Kenya and the role of audits in a democracy like Kenya. That is what I want to discuss in the next 30 minutes. So the topic can be as wide as possible and can be as brief as possible. And one thing I want to say is that this is a continuation of where we began from last time, where we spoke about or decoded the budget making process in Kenya. So, like you're going to see when we're dealing with audits now, most of those things are repeating themselves, especially the principles under the constitution and even some of the processes that we're going to see here. So I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation which I'd like to project. Today I should not be having any issues with the projection. Um, could you kindly confirm that my screen can be seen?
Yes.
Yes, very well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So why is this talk important? First, it is important because I believe I'm speaking to Linda Vijana Initiative, which is an NGO. So NGOs, sometimes we know them, they are advocacy groups or advocacy vehicles that can help champion for particular causes in society. Today, we have called them public benefit organizations. So we don't have NGOs anymore. We have public benefits organization. And one of the best definitions of a public benefit organization is any organization that carries out activities or operations that are meant to have the greater impact on everyone in society. So people can choose aspects they want to deal with in society, and some PBOs then choose to venture into the area of governance, which is one of the very important and integral aspects of a working democracy. So, we, being a guest invited by Linda Vijana Initiative, the purpose of this talk resonates so well with what Linda Vijana does in terms of trying to spur a robust and vibrant democracy in the Republic of Kenya and beyond. So by the end of this talk, you should be able to appreciate why audits are important, what they really are, and why we need to understand audits in terms of management or responsible management, that is, of public resources. So generally, we first need to understand what audits are in terms of the concept. When you hear audits, what does it mean? The other time we talked about the budget making process and we were able to decode the definition of a budget and even have some relatable definitions by trying to say what a budget means in our households and how it graduates in terms of definition up to the country level. The same thing would be true with audits. So you can audit anything. And one of the characteristics of audits is that you are doing an examination. In this context, an examination of an organization's financial records. This organization can be your own organization as an individual. It can be a company. It can be a country. It can be a region. It can be uh, any vehicle or structure of organization that has financial records to be examined. So it is audits are then systematic examinations that you do, trying to look at the financial records, transactions, and operations. And what you're trying to do is to see whether they are accurate. Now, how do you know that something is accurate? Then there must be some predetermined regulations that provide the goalposts. So you're saying this is where you have to score within these particular parameters. So there must be certain regulations that will tell you that there is some accuracy or inaccuracy. So when we're talking about audits, we are trying to see, are there discrepancies? Are there inefficiencies? Uh, and if they are, what should we do? Do we need improvement? Do we need an overhaul? Do we need to arrest somebody? Do we need to punish somebody? And what do we do with that information? So who does all this? This, for you to do any audit, like we say, it is an examination. So examination traditionally and in terms of theory, it must be administered by an expert, somebody who could be knowing something better than another. So you must have an expert that does that exercise. Then they give something called an opinion. So what you get from an audit in the audit report is an opinion. So the need for an expert, as we agree that that expert must be independent, is what then led to the creation of the Office of the Auditor General in Kenya. So in Kenya, this independent expert is the Office of the Auditor General, that which is an independent office, just like we have defined an auditor to be an independent expert. So having that background in mind, we need to understand some of the legal infrastructure surrounding audits in Kenya. Like you're going to see later in this presentation, we have when we talk about public finance management, we have predominantly four pieces of legislation that govern this area. And the mother of them all is the Constitution of Kenya that anchors each of these. We have the Public Audit Act of 2015. We have the Public Finance Management Act 2012. We also have the Public Finance Management Amendment Act of 2014. I forgot to put it here. We have the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act. So today's presentation may not interact with each of these particular pieces of legislation and what they actually provide for. But anytime you have um, issues with budget making process, budget generally, audits in Kenya, these will be your uh, places of reference or points of reference in case you have any doubts or there's something to clarify. What we say in our training and practice as lawyers is that you are taught where to find the law. You may not know the law, but as long as you know where to find it, you will find yourself navigating. That is why some of these talks are very, very important, because from here somebody will be able to know that if I want to talk about audits, this is the relevant piece of legislation that I should be looking out for. So just mentioning them alone is the first step uh, to getting to know what they all entail. So I spoke about the independent expert, and Kenyans saw it wise to have a constitution that provides for the office of the Auditor General, which is an independent office under the Constitution of Kenya 2010. So that office is established under Article 229 of the Constitution, and its sole mandate is to audit all public funded entities, underline public funded entities. So we have public funded entities um, at both the national level and county level of government. Remember, we have devolution, the devolved system. So, like you're going to see later when I'm going to explain the difference between Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly and the Public Investment Committee, you're going to appreciate some of the differences between the public funded entities at national and county levels. So the independent office of the Auditor General is headed by somebody called an Auditor General. So at every given time, you will see the Auditor General. So to know more about the Auditor General, whether you want to know about the tenure and all that, your reference point is to go to Article 229 of the Constitution of Kenya. Now, before we go deeper, you also need to understand, okay, we have the Auditor General. It's an independent office. I call them Chapter 15 entities because those independent offices are found under Chapter 15 of the Constitution. So you are the Auditor General. You are an office, an independent office, just like any other office, just like IEBC, just like the TSC. So how do we audit you? So who audits the Auditor General? The answer there is found under Article 226 of the Constitution, where the Constitution envisages a place where the National Assembly would hire or procure a professionally qualified accountant to do audits on the Auditor General. So that is a question that we may need to understand. I put it here because I've been asked this question sometimes before, and it was the most interesting question I had in that presentation. So with that background, one thing I like talking about is the clockwork of anything that there be. So most of the legislations today have some clockwork in them. So there are some timelines that are prescribed when to do what and why. So when talking about audit timelines in Kenya, you go to your Article 229 of the Constitution, Clause 4 there, it says that within 6 months after the end of each financial year, the Auditor General shall audit and report Um, to that respect, all the accounts of the national and county governments and other public offices. So this is where you have the Auditor General telling you about counties, telling you about political parties and how they were funded, and how those funds were utilized. So you have Section 32 of the Public Audit Act, and this section requires the Auditor General to always publicize a report within 14 days after submitting that report to the Parliament, uh, and that report should be and must be available to the general public, and that has been made possible by having a website. So there is the website that is operated and run by the Office of the Auditor General. There's a lot of information that you should be able to find there, and like you're going to see some of the information that you should be looking out for in this discussion. So when you have queries or when you want to know about something, you will be going to the website. That is the Auditor Office of the Auditor General website. So this timeline is very, very important, and I don't want to repeat what we discussed the other time. Somebody can just review the recording where we spoke about the budget making process and the 6 months timeline in terms of the report of the Auditor General each financial year. So, like you've seen, there's a bit that I've skipped, which I'm going to discuss later. But I want us to understand the role of the legislature. In Kenya, we have the legislature at the National Assembly, the legislature at the county level. So at counties, we have county assemblies, National Assembly, we have for the national government. So how do we deal with the reports of the Auditor General? Uh, who can direct the Auditor General to do any audit, and where do they draw that power? That's what I have skipped, which I'm coming to discuss in a bit. So if you read your Article 229, Clause 8 of the Constitution, there is the role of the county assembly committees and the parliamentary committees, that is the committees in the National Assembly, to determine outstanding issues that are arising from the audits as published, so that maybe action could be taken. So what does it mean when we say determination of outstanding audit issues? An audit is an examination. The examination comes with an opinion. So once you do any examination, you either pass or fail, or you are compliant or non-compliant if there may be some parameters that you need to meet. So those, if time will allow us, I'll try to give you some of the terminologies that you should be looking out for when reading any audit report, so that you know what the audit is saying, whichever audit you come across. So the law requires these bodies, that is the uh, National Assembly and the County Assembly, to prepare a report on the audit findings. So what did the Auditor General find? And what are the reports? So if they have anything that is implicating somebody somewhere, the National Assembly or the County Assembly will always try to recommend investigations. So that is where you hear uh, some people being investigated by the police, the DCI, the EACC. So it is envisioned that those particular reports will always be considered by the County Assembly or National Assembly, depending on which report we're talking about and where it was commissioned, so that there is at least something. So why do we do the audits? Like we said, we do the audits to ensure that there's some scrutiny, and so that somebody can be held to account for whatever discrepancies or inefficiencies or inaccuracies that there be. So According to Section 32 of the Public Audit Act, um, Parliament is given just 7 days after receiving that Auditor General's report to publicize in its official website and other public spaces uh, that particular audit report. Remember, the Auditor General is also mandated to publish that same report that they submitted to the Parliament within 7 days. So another place where you can find the audit reports is both the Auditor General's Office of the Auditor General website and that official website uh, for the Parliament. So what happens once that audit is there is that the Parliamentary Accounts Committee is required to discuss national and county government audit reports. So you've heard of the famous PAC and PIC, that is the Parliamentary Accounts Committee and the Parliamentary Investments Committee. So these committees are some of the powerful committees in those in Parliament, and one of their roles is to for the role of the PAC, that is the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, is to discuss national and county government audit reports. So, like you're going to see, an audit can be through maybe a request so that you are auditing a particular thing for a particular purpose. And sometimes it will be an audit that is general. So when we have an audit that handles that deals with the uh, maybe the performance of the parastatals, that one will fall within the parliamentary investment committees, and that will be within the authority, and the other committees like the parliamentary accounts committee will not be there to deal with that particular thing. So we can have, like I said, we can have these parastatals uh, either at the county level or the national level. An example of parastatal is the let me say Ketraco, Kenya, uh, Kenya transmission something, Ketraco, that transmits the power uh, after production or generation. We would talk about KPLC. We would talk about any company that you know that is a government run. So um, I think that is enough for trying to say the role of the Public Investment Committee and the Public Accounts Committee. Um, Up to that point, before you begin questioning what are we doing here and why is this important, you need to understand that, like we've said, all we are doing in audits is to try and see whether there are some loopholes, some inaccuracies, some inefficiencies, and what we can do with those inefficiencies. That is the role of an audits. Is everything okay? And if something is not okay, what do we do? So, as advocates, as people who champion for openness in governance, accountability, transparency, clarity, and all that, you must be able to understand that, okay, what do I do with the information that I have? We're going to see shortly how to read those reports. So, what are you going to do with all that information that you have? I usually say that information or knowledge is power, but withholding that power is idiocy. Idiocy means you know something, you know the right thing, you know what is to be done, but you're not doing it. You're not doing it. So that is what we have to dispel before we go get that information. You have to know, what am I going to do with the information that I want and that I have? Otherwise, it will be useless for you to have that information. So that brings me to the topic advocacy on public audits. So once you've understood public audits and you know what you want to do with it, then there are some 5 tips that you must know as an individual, as an organization, as a leader, whoever you are, so that um, you are able to at least uh, dissociate from the group of idiots who have information but sit on it. So the first thing is to understand the principles of public finance management. Where do we find these principles of public finance management? These principles are itemized under the Constitution of Kenya 2010. They are a bit general. Others have been developed through case law. Others have been developed through other pieces of legislation and comparative international law. And so those principles under the Constitution, particularly Article 201 of the Constitution, are openness, accountability, public participation, equity, clarity, prudent application of public resources. So these things, they sound like a repetition because it's the same thing. It's the same thing. When you're saying openness, it's the same thing as accountability. It's the same thing as public participation, which simply means you've opened it for people to be able to question you or to guide you and be able to know what's going on and what's not going on. So those are the principles under the Constitution. If we were to have a discussion on what each of them entail, it would be a very long discussion, which we cannot do in the 30 minutes that we had for today. After you've understood, what we have to agree on first is that you must understand public finance management and what that means. Public finance simply means that monies that belong to the people, for the people, by the people, and this money has been given to somebody to handle in their capacity as a public officer, which can be in several respects, whether through election, through nomination, through appointments, and all those. So those will be public officers, whether in state office or where or wherever. So what those people do is to manage public finances. There is no government minus money. Tax then comes in to be the lifeblood. It's what pumps any government. And when we talk about money, when we talk about finances, we talk about that ability that you give to the government of the day to come into your pocket and pick what otherwise people would scream when somebody else was picking from your pocket. So that is what we're discussing. So somebody has taken money that ought to be in your pocket. You have to know how they want to use it, where they use it, and when they use it. So that, having understood that, the second thing that you need to understand is what then are the offenses? Are there some offenses? What of an offense is what should not be done, basically. So you have to understand what should not be done with your money. And where do you get that? If you read your Public Finance Management Act, if you read your Public Audits Act, you will understand the offenses that are created there. There are 4 main offenses there, up to 5 major ones. And number one is somebody trying to do expenditure minus approval. That becomes an offense. So how will you know? You will know through the audit reports that, okay, there was some expenditures here, but they were not approved. Or whenever you see an expenditure, you will see, okay, was there an approval mechanism? Was that achieved? We'll be looking out for misappropriation of funds, and you'll be looking out for corruption. You'll be looking out for withholding of information. You'll be looking out for things like misleading information, where somebody publishes a thing to arrive at a particular, maybe to mislead generally. I mean, it's very basic. It's very basic. So once you understand the role of that, what public funds are, you must understand what ought not to be done with public funds. And as I've broken them down, public funds, there must be openness, clarity, accountability, and that the first thing to guarantee that is the provision of information. So if somebody is withholding that information, that it means you cannot question them. So the first offense is to withhold information. So once you have the information, you should be able to tell whether there is a misappropriation. And if you find that, it's an offense. You'll be able to tell whether the information you're given is misleading. How will you know? Through other parameters that you'll be able to understand as we continue these discussions. So that is what you do with the information that you have already. So the third thing that you need to know is to understand the penalties um, that can be pegged against the offenders. So whoever violates those particular provisions, what can happen to them? We have Article 225 of the Constitution giving us some general, some of these have been perfected through pieces of legislation that give life into Article 225 of the Constitution. So you can have things like fines, you can have things like imprisonment, you have people being asked to reimburse, for lack of a better term, uh, uh, return the money where they got it from, trying to bar some people perpetually from holding public offices. For that is why, for example, if you are impeached as a governor, you are therefore disbarred from ever holding any public office, and public office includes a state office. So those are some of the things you need to understand, and these understanding these ones will tell you what to do and what not to do. So I have taken you through the penalties, just an overview. um, I'm skipping that slide. The fourth thing that you need to understand in terms of your role as an advocate for accountability, transparency in management of public finances is um, the enforcement of sanctions. Well, we know you can be surcharged. We know you can be fined. We know you can be imprisoned. We know you can be disbarred. But how is that achieved? It is until you call out for enforcement of those sanctions. So enforcement is how enforcement is achieved is guided by the relevant provisions of the law, so that you will know where to report, you will know who to complain to in that regard. So, generally, in terms of enforcement of sanctions that we have in the ambit of public finance management, are number one, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We have the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. We have the Director of Criminal Investigations. So another time, I know we'll have opportunity to discuss the roles of each of these, how they interplay, and what makes them different, because we're talking about enforcement here. So where do we go to? Why with which kind of issues? So that is the fourth thing that you need to understand. The last tip that I'm giving is active participation in the budget formulation, approval, and implementation stages. This we discussed in great details last time, and I would not want to repeat. So, like I said, the budget making process is a whole annual process. Annual means it is yearly. The process lasts actually in each and every month of the year. There is something being done in terms of the budget formulation, approval, and implementation, those stages. So it is not just a question of one day that you hear people talking about a finance act. It is not a question of 2 weeks or 1 week. It is a 12, it's a 365 days activity. So that today, as we speak, when we are talking about challenging the Finance Act of 2023, there is already the process of the Finance Act of 2025 that is being launched already. So, and these timelines are cast in stone because they are provided for in various legislations. So the audit process is, by and large, a part of the larger budget cycle. So to do effective advocacy as an individual, as an entity, whoever you are, you must engage throughout the entire budget process. If you are able to engage through the entire budget process, then we will be able to say that we are utilizing the audit opportunities, so that you will be having opportunity to audit whichever reports that you have. Like I said, audit simply means examining. So even the audit report that you're getting is subject to audit. So when you're reading it, you read it with the mindset of an auditor, so that you're also having uh, a scheme of what you're looking for. So public participation is a big thing in the Republic of Kenya, as it should be in any democracy. So this is a principle that is anchored in several provisions of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, where we have Article 1 saying that all the sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. It says it may be exercised um, directly or indirectly. Then that was a bit vague, but Article 10 makes it clear, particularly 10 clause 2, that there is some better chance for the people to engage in determining what the power they donated to the leaders can do. So under that power, we have the public participation, that yes, go and think for us. We elected you. Well and good, represent us, think for us. But whatever you think, bring it back, so that we are able to okay it. If we can't okay it, it should not be able to proceed. So, for example, Article 221 makes it mandatory for the National Assembly, in discussing and reviewing the budget estimates, to always get opinions of the people, that is the public, and take into account those particular opinions, so that it makes recommendations telling what the opinions were and how they have shaped or reshaped whatever proposal was there. And in this, I'm attempted to discuss the case that Paul Peter just mentioned, the Finance Act of 2023, which today has rendered an interpretation that has never been there before since the enactment of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, where we have never had the budget of the Republic of Kenya, the annual budget, having the revenue and expenditure side. So a budget technically should be like a balance sheet, so that we have the revenue side on and the expenditure side, so that before you talk about expenses, you can tell that this is the much that we have as a country. This is the revenue that we can raise as a country. But what has been happening since 2010 is that in fact, even before 2010, it is what was inherited before 2010, which the Constitution sought to cure, that we would be having um a situation where we have audits telling us, look, this is the much we can raise as a country because of this and this. So based on what you can raise, then you come up with that expenditure. But what we have been seeing in Kenya is where we have expenditure first, so that we are saying, okay, now we have the expenditure, we now have to look for the revenue. That is now a thing of the past, based on the decision that we got from the Court of Appeal yesterday. So we hope that will not be overturned by the Supreme Court. Uh, and we hope they let that progressive interpretation of the law stay. So, like I said, public participation is the heart of anything, because being elected as a leader, that does not make you God. It does not make you the SI unit for knowledge and all that. You're just there to represent. So always there are wiser people, there are more knowledgeable people than you are. So that is why the Constitution provides for public participation, so that you are able to engage as you steer whatever you are trying to do. I did not time myself. Please let me know how much time I have left, so that I'm able to see what I should be discussing or not. Paul,
19 minutes.
I have 19 minutes left.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in my 19 minutes left, I want to answer I want to discuss a few things that I've always had as questions in the previous discussion that I've held elsewhere. So, three things that I want to answer. Number one, um, can the Office of the Auditor General audit private entities? That is a question I'm going to answer. Then, who can make the Auditor General undertake an audit? Who can make the Auditor General undertake an audit? Then the third question I'm going to answer is, what are the types of audits that we have in Kenya? What types of audits do
Mm.
we have? Not just in
Maybe
Kenya, but
as you go on with that, you will also answer why when the president whatever chose, I don't know, appointed some people to form some committee or task force, whatever, to do public audits, there was an uproar that is against, that is unconstitutional, and there is a court injunction to that effect or something like that.
yeah, okay, I'll mention that. I'll mention that. I hope I will not disclose something. Okay, now, um, can the Office of the Auditor General audit private entities? The answer is no, it cannot, because as I began, I told you the Auditor General is mandated, if you read Article 229, to to especially, particularly Article 229, Clause 5, that it shall auditor the accounts of entities that are funded from public fund. That is Article 229, Clause 5. So the Auditor General or Office of the Auditor General cannot audit a private company generally. There's something you're going to see somewhere. So it cannot do that. So what are these public funded entities? I like clarifying because I also got that question somewhere. So audit reports will always cover the financial operations of departments, ministries and their departments, agencies of the state, the funds. There are several funds established by various pieces of legislation. For example, today we are talking about the Affordable Housing Fund. So that fund can be audited. That's what I mean by fund. We can have the pensions fund. So that becomes a fund. Then we have the development partners funded projects. Anything where public money or public funds have been pumped into by the government is a subject and can be audited. So, who can make the Auditor General undertake an audit? Who?
Does that include the secret fund, whatever? We had something to do with secret. Is it secret budget or secret fund?
Secret fund? Okay, I'll
In the
answer you this.
budget, the
Yes.
2024 budget, and I think it's always been there. There is some allocation for secret something.
Yes, that is an allocation that is used to, I would call it, some of those things are technically confidential in terms of trying not to disclose some very critical information that if an adversary had, um, then they would easily destabilize a government and all that. But that does not mean that those things cannot be audited by the Auditor General. Any fund, anything said to be done with the public funds under the Constitution can be audited by the Auditor General under Article 229 of the Constitution. So the role of the Auditor General in terms of the actions that they should do is stipulated under Article 254 of the Constitution, which provides for reporting by commissions and independent officers. So, under Article 254, Clause 1 in particular, the Auditor General is required to submit a report to Parliament. And that report submitted to Parliament must also be submitted to the President of the Republic of Kenya. So Article 254 Clause 2 then specifies that apart from that routine annual report, like we've seen, the one that we need to see after every 6 months, within 6 months of the end of the financial year, a constitutional commission or independent office may be directed to provide a report on any specific matter. So who can ask this people to provide a report? Number one, it is the President, National Assembly, or the Senate. That is under Article 254, Clause 2. So it mentions three. That is the President. The President can ask an independent commission or the any independent office to do a give a report. So those are the first three. So your first count is the National Assembly, the President, or the Senate can ask for a report. So Article 229, Clause 7 then provides that audit shall be submitted to Parliament or the relevant county assembly. And another thing that is coming in, Parliament or relevant county assembly. So it means that we can be having a requisition by a county assembly, a particular county assembly, say Homa Bay County, asking the Auditor General to do a report. That is within 229 Clause 7. So it is a bit unclear there. Does it mean that the President, National Assembly, or the Senate are the only persons or people who can direct the Auditor General to conduct a report? Would that be uh, if that report is requested by the President? Where will it be going? Is it to the County Assembly? So the mention of County Assembly under Article 229, Clause 7 imply that the County Assembly can direct the Auditor General to conduct an audit. So there is a case of there's a recent case, the case of Ondago versus Natembea and 15 others. It is a 2023 case where the governor tried to commission some audits and set a task force like what the president tried to do to conduct a report and an audit and report. So the court said no. If you are the governor, in fact, you have to submit your request to the county assembly, so that the county assembly will be asking the auditor general to conduct a report. So that is, we now see the county assembly as the fourth in terms of who can ask for uh, an audit. So where do we use, I also need to say this even as we continue, where do we use these audit reports? These audit reports, we use them um, to assess if the public finances, public resources have been used prudently. Have they been used as required? The other time we defined, we explained that the budget is basically a tool that is used to show the projects that the government would want to do and where they would want to be done, so that by the time you're doing an audit, you're checking, was the budget that was passed, or is the budget that was passed the same thing that we are seeing in terms of the expenses that we are seeing, and that is hence the concept of prudence. So in that respect, then the Office of the Auditor General usually release various audit reports annually. So some of those reports you'll see they touch on ministries, some touch on corporations, some on county governments, some on other public entities. So one day you will hear, oh, there is an audit report on this particular county government. Oh, it's an audit report elsewhere. So that explains all that you've been seeing there. So another thing that I took you back a bit because I realized that I did not put that clearly. Another interesting thing is we have the Constitution of Kenya 2010 under Article 260 has the definitions provisions, and that provision defines a person to include any individual which is a natural human being or an artificial person. Artificial person is a legal person. A legal person is an incorporated entity. Incorporated entity is something that is perpetual in terms of uh, I think I'm going to where I should not go. But what I'm saying is that particular provision of the Constitution defines a person to include human beings and I would call it artificial persons or entities. So it then means that every person under that Constitution can ask the Auditor General to do a report or to do an audit, then give a report. So that particular can be Safaricom. When I say Safaricom, I mean an artificial person. That person can be Paul. That means Tino Paul Peter. So this can be inferred from the provisions regarding the general powers of commissions under the Constitution, particularly Article 252, Clause 1, which I tried to discuss. If you look at 2, it says that a complaint to a commission or holder of an independent office may be made by any person. So when you say any person, it means, like I said, a human being and all that and all that. So we now move to the Public Audit Act, and it provides for the general powers of the Auditor General. And those powers are so many, but I've summarized them into four. And the first one in my list is that the Auditor General has the mandate to conduct investigations either on his or her own initiative, meaning they can simply wake up on uh, one day and say, I want to audit this particular county government without reason, or maybe they have reason somewhere, or they had a dream on the basis of a complaint made by a third party or on their own basis. So you could be that third party. Lena Vijana could be that third party. You, Peter, can be that third party. Anybody can be that party who tells the Auditor General that, look, can you investigate this? So Auditor General can act on that. Number two, the mandate of the Auditor General is to obtain professional assistance, consultancy, and advice from such persons they believe have the qualifications, or even organizations, whether in Kenya or beyond. So you've heard of companies like the KPMG, like the PwC, doing audits here and there. So that is how you hear of these people coming in, because there is that leeway provided or given to the Auditor General to always outsource. So the Auditor General also does conciliation, mediation, and negotiation. Whether that is appropriate is another thing, but elsewhere you'd understand why there would be need for mediation and negotiation in terms of mismanagement or inefficiencies in administration or management of public funds. Then the fourth thing in my summary is that Auditor General has the mandate to issue summons to a person or a witness for the purposes of their investigation. So, investigation, they could have reason to believe that so and so has some information that could help them in unearthing a particular thing, then they can summon you for investigations. So, under the Code 29, we have three types of audits. And those audits are the annual financial audits, that is the, I would call it the default audit by default. So you have the annual financial audits, then you have performance audits, you have procurement audits. That is within Article 229 of the Constitution. So what are the differences between these audits? So when we talk about annual financial audits, we talk about uh, those audits that are undertaken for state organs and the public entities, so that the Auditor General is reporting annually on those particular uh, departments. So, like I've said, we have the state organs, we have public entities in general. So, it is annual, it must exist in that manner. Number two, and it is the audit that is mentioned when we're talking about submission of that audit within 6 months after the end of the financial year. So, you need that. Number two is what we call the performance audits. So, a performance audit is conducted to examine the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness with which public money has been expended. So, these audits usually relate to project implementation, if I can summarize it in that way. So, there is a particular project ongoing. We are having maybe a particular road that has been built or is being built. So, we look at how is it performing. You examine that efficiency, effectiveness, and all that. Was the purpose meant to put differently? We said the doctrine or principle of prudency, which is very very important in when talking about public finances. So we are trying to see, was there prudent use of money in this particular project. So when you hear performance audits, they relate to project implementation. The third audit under Article 229 is the procurement audit. I know many of you are familiar with this. So this is where the Auditor General examines the public procurement asset disposal processes of a state organ and public entity. And why are they doing that? Why would they examine all those? What they want is to confirm whether those procurements were done lawfully and in an effective way. Procurement is a big thing in every particular state organ. So, like you heard of the infamous Ministry of Health scandals during the COVID. So, how do we get to know of those scandals? It is those procurement audits. So, there are principles therein and schemes or scales and parameters used to determine whether the procurement process scored within the goals. So, those are the three types of audits under Article 229. However, we have other two types of audits that the Auditor General may as well undertake, and these are the periodic audits, and this other one we call it um, forensic audit. I'm sure you've heard about these terminologies. So we have periodic audits and forensic audit. So periodic audits are actually expressly provided for under Section 34, yes, of the Public Audit Act of 2015. And these periodic audits may be undertaken by the Auditor General at will, or when tipped by somebody, or asked by somebody, requested by somebody, or an entity to do that particular audit. So these audits, I would call them proactive. They could be proactive, meaning they are reacting to, they are trying to react to a particular situation, or especially with the view of maybe, yeah, I would put it that way. They are reacting to a particular situation, either to correct it. So we have them taking that form of being proactive, or you can do the audits, a periodic audit with the view of preventing a particular thing, maybe from recurring or reoccurring. So I would call that preventive audit, or I can have another third category, which I call determinant of fraud and corrupt practices. So you do this thing after a particular period. So, for example, like you'd have in a small farm, a typical business organization or setup where you do your audits after every week, after every month, after every year. So you can have those periodic audits. So they're usually carried out to determine and evaluate the effectiveness of
Very,
largely risk management.
I think you've exhausted the minutes, and yet there are a few questions that came up, which I think are fairly simple. You can summarize with them. If you allow me, I'll just read them, and then
Paul,
when yes,
there's the last audit that I have to talk about. Then I'll
okay,
deal
okay,
uh, with the
okay,
question. So the last audit is I've talked about periodic audits, and the last audit I want to tell you about is the forensic audit. And to know more about forensic audit, read section 37 of the Public Audit Act of 2015. These are the only person who can request forensic audit is the Parliament, that is Parliament and county assemblies. So when you are requesting a forensic audit, it's you are trying to establish fraud, corruption, or other financial improprieties in state organs and public entities. So you need to understand because there are some instances, like we said, information you can always request a particular information. So you must be able to know which information are you requesting for and where can you get which information. So you have your MPs, you have your MCAs. When you need whichever type of audit, you know who to go to, where and why. So get your public procurement, the Public Audit Act, read your section 34, 37 to understand forensic audits and periodic audits. Get your Article 229 to understand the other three types of audits. In conclusion, I would say before I answer the questions that every person, you and myself, any company, any entity, any organization has that right to request the Auditor General to conduct an audit. So um, they will do that as outlined under Article 254, Clause 2 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. I'll be able to take questions from you right now.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we are at 9:33. I thought we would be done by 9:30. So the first question came from Peter Makori. I'm not very sure I understood it, but you can tell me if you understand it. Is land banking allocated funds for compensation? Is land banking allocated funds for compensation? Do you get what that means?
I'm trying to access the chat, so I'll be.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the first question there. But if you get that, you'll be able to answer it. The other three questions are coming from Anne. No, there is one from Unread, and then there are two from Anne. How does the community get information for public participation and venues communication? What are the communication channels? I believe that's the question. How do they get to know that this is when we are supposed to participate? This is how we are going to participate. This is where we are supposed to meet. And then the other question is what you've just finished with. Do we conclude that an audit can be called for by the president, the National Assembly, the Senate, the county, and any other person? Is that true that anybody can call for? They can ask the office of the Auditor General to conduct an audit, except of course the forensic audit, which you said only the county assembly and the National Assembly can call for. And then the last question is comment on any comment on the delegated audit. I think you've also mentioned this, where the auditor delegates audit to be done by a contracted firm. You talked about the roles of the Auditor General, and one of them included outsourcing. They could outsource, and you mentioned KPMG and PwC and the rest. So those are the questions. Maybe you can just.
Uh, Very well, very well. Thank you. Very interesting questions. Now, the first question I would consider I don't understand when you say is land banking. I don't understand the question completely. I move to the next question. Maybe we'll ask that person to unmute and may perhaps clarify afterwards so that we answer it. The second question, was about um, is
Public
it
participation, how people get information on public participation.
good? So public participation, like I said, can be with respect to so many things. I will repeat that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and so many pieces of legislation today have the provision for public participation. So public participation can be called in various respects and at various times. So in terms of the budget making process, where I mentioned public participation, there will always be gazettements. So there will always be a gazette notice saying that we are calling on the public to submit their views, and they usually state the venue and the time, which time must be between sunrise and sunset. So that is one. Number two, these particular public participations, they not only happen at the national government operations, even with the county governments, there are always several activities that go on which require public participation. So in the counties like where I come from, they usually have the activities outlined in the website. Sometimes they move with some public address systems along the roads, notifying people casually that, oh, on this particular day we are going to have the budget and this and this. Some people go to the radio stations, and a number of the counties do that, where they make the announcements through the media. So always you have to be on the lookout, because if you don't find it in the website, of which all the provisions of the law require that if you're going to have a public participation, your National Assembly, you must publish that in your website. The county of whichever county you come from, there will always be that particular call. So how do you get to know that the public is invited to do something? Number one, I don't know how close you are with your radio or national television, and all that and all that. So that is how you will come across those notices. Um, yeah. So one thing I'm emphasizing is that when we talk about audits, uh, there is very little there is very little input of the public that is required when we talk about the audit process, because all you are required to know is that there is this report by the auditor general, so that you are able to scrutinize it. But when the auditor does the his or her own investigation and come up with a report, there's really no public participation involved. um, that I would say. So public participation will always be when there is a new legislation to be enacted by the county or by the National Assembly, and things like those. When they are trying to build a road, for example, there's a new development coming in your area, there's a land to be acquired publicly. Those are some of the times you're going to have uh, your views being requested by the particular entity. So the problem has always been that it is done more like a PR exercise, where it is just to tick the box. However, the upcoming jurisprudence show that it must be meaningful and very effective. So today there must be actually reports showing what the people said and how those particular opinions were considered and treated in the ultimate result that is then given out. I can say so many things about public participation, Paul. So
Yeah,
I hope
but we don't we don't have that time, my friend. I think you are also getting late for me. So I think the last two questions are the ones that you handled. One is who can call for the audit, and the question exactly was is can we conclude that the president, the National Assembly, Senate, County Assembly, and any other person can call for audit?
good. Um, any person can call for the audit. Like I said, if you read your Article 254 Clause 2, it says any person. If you go to Article 260, it defines a person to include an individual, an entity, and all that. And I mentioned five types of audits. The first
Yes.
three the first three being established under Article 229 of the Constitution, and those are the the uh, how would I categorize? Like I said, uh, the annual
Annual
audits,
periodic audits.
periodic
Uh,
audits, and something is distracting me here, but I'll be good. So annual audits, performance audits, and procurement audits. These are the audits under at your Article 229. But when we talk about the last two, which is the periodic and forensic audits, they are audits under the Public Audits Act, that is Section 34 and 37, respectively. So if you read that particular provision, um, forensic audits, for you to have forensic audits, you need to be the National Assembly, the County Assembly, the President, or the Senate. If you look at all those, there is one common feature that they are legislative. They're the legislature, National Assembly, County Assembly, Senate. Those are the legislature. Then the leeway that is given to the president. So when you write to the how do you get an audit conducted, so you can give information to the auditor general, which information will make the auditor general believe that there is need for an audit somewhere. So you may write to the auditor general and ask the auditor general to conduct that audit. For if you want an audit to be conducted in your own county, we are talking about delegated representation. So you will be going through your member of county assembly and say, look, we want this audited and all that. So the first thing you need to understand is what type of audit are you talking about? Is it periodic audit? Because number one, like I said, an annual audit will come. It is automatic. I call it the default audit. Then when you talk about performance audit, we are talking about a particular project. So you may have there's a primary school being constructed in your village or in your hometown. You want a performance audit for that particular construction. How do you go about requiring or requesting for that information? Number three, I spoke about the forensic audits and what it says. We are saying there is somehow there could be a problem, and how do you get that problem? Remember, I told you the public investment committee will those committees of the assembly and the national assembly, county assembly, national assembly will always consider that report and make a report. So the report can say, okay, we need a forensic audit for this particular thing. So always be on the look and always be able to follow up and even have a good rapport with your area MCA, area MP, to ask them to have this information that you need.
uh, Thank you. This subject is sweet for you, I see. I'd like to ask Peter Makori, you can unmute and maybe explain your question. You can then answer it briefly, Benson, so that we close. it's
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter. To me, my question was all about, like you see, when the county governments came around, many roads were constructed through people's private lands, but there was no compensation. When you go ahead asking about the same, you are being told, oh, the government has said it wants to construct a road through here. So there is no compensation. Now you fail to understand, what does this mean? Yet, okay, when you look at it from other parts of the country, you find that people are being compensated. That is, they are the stakeholders, the owners of the land are being called. They are okay. They are engaged on the same exercise. Then from there, they come to a conclusion and an agreement for the compensation. Then from there, after the compensation, that's when the road comes and pass through. But the area I'm talking about is like now, Munyonge hana haki. Yani at the government has said, no, now they just come and they wanavunja mavitu, they go around saying, oh, the government has said. But in the real sense, you do understand that there is need for compensation. That's what I wanted to ask about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ben, I hope you got it.
A very interesting question that goes to what really made me study law. what made me study law is that there was an airstrip constructed in my village. When I asked about the story of that airstrip and why it took some parts of people's lands and others not, and all that, I was told that when the government was asking people about their ideas, only teachers were allowed to attend those meetings and give their views. So if you were not a teacher, then you would not even attend those particular uh, meetings. So my parents happened not to be the teachers. Some of their brothers were teachers. So in that family, the brothers who were teachers were allowed to attend. So the whole thing, I mean, I was asking myself, okay, why and all that and all that? Why do we have these inequalities and things like those? Sorry, that took me back to why I went to study law. So yes, some of these public participation processes have always been botched and done as mere PR exercises, and some people do that with by design. I mean, because they have a particular objective that they want to achieve, so that they have a well calculated stuff. So for example, you may find that the people with the most lucrative pieces of land are not brought in or brought on board, and things like those. So people usually just like hijacking the processes. Like you said, when we talk about acquisition of private land for public by the government, we call that process conversion of public land to private land to public land. And there is a whole process, and the Constitution of Kenya makes it that is the only time when your right to property can be limited. It is the only exemption given under Article 40 of the Constitution, that your right to property can only be limited when the government has has developed interest in your land. And if that is the case, there are processes that are established where you will be notified, being given opportunity to defend yourself, whether you agree or not agree. There will be valuation of the property there. There will be um, a lot of approvals by the National Land Commission and all those particular processes involved. So yes, like you said, and you're saying that elsewhere you've had people going through the requisite processes, but in your scenario, nothing happened. So maybe you are trying to ask what next? That has happened. So what next is yes, you should be able to request for information. Article 335 of the Constitution today gives you that right. So you're asking, I want to know the I want to have the records of the public participation that uh, was conducted in this particular project. So who are there and things like those. So that would be too investigative, and I don't know your capacity as the person who will be requesting for that information and what you want to use it for. But the long and short of my answer would be that yes, any process that violates the freedom or right to public participation is void from its onset. That means it is as good as it never happened. And what usually happens is that you can, if you follow it perfectly, you can always uh, get compensation if it can be established that you are never compensated. You could be one person, you may be so many, but if it can be shown that that process was botched, then it can be nullified, and there is no right in the Constitution of Kenya with no remedy. So if you have any of your rights violated, there will always be a remedy, and it only requires some bit of tact and awareness or information in terms of how you want to approach uh, the issue. I think, Peter, I would answer you in that manner, given that you've given me a
Thank
bit of
you.
a background to a specific issue.
Thank you. I think we have to stop there. We are 20 minutes past the time. And I would like to just, on my own behalf, say thank you. And on behalf of Linda Vijana Initiative, our effort is to ensure that when people are talking, they talk from a point of knowledge. You talk from a point of information, not just making noise or heckling without information. And we appreciate you taking time to educate us so that when we are engaged in debates, even when we go for public participation, when we hear of the audit reports like we've been hearing about them, then we understand what they are, where to get them for more information and how we can use them. So thank you very much. And Peter has said there that your presentation was good and the answer is appropriate. Otherwise, I'd like us to close by saying that we do this every first Friday of the month. We choose a topic that would help the public to have better understanding, and then we discuss it. We look for speakers, and this is also our contribution to the society as part of civic education, and as also empowerment to the young people, so that we are not used or misused. And in that case, I'd like us to conclude by saying, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and forevermore. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Catherine, if you have a word you can say, otherwise, I think we are done.
No, if I was to have my way, I would say we continue. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your patience. And I think we still have Wakili next time. We are doing a series with him. Asante sana.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Salimia kijana.